Alright, we are on the play here. Great. That's good news for our deck. And kind of a questionable hand. Double Blood Moon. It's one too many Blood Moons, most likely. Plus some expensive Planeswalkers. I am going to keep this, though. If we're able to play a Blood Moon on the play, it can potentially be very good. Although that is somewhat dependent on the matchup. So, including the Spirit Guides, we do have 29 mana sources, so we're a pretty big favorite to have a way to get this Blood Moon in on turn 3. Although our opponent's starting on a Noble Hierarch. Actually, okay, so we drew a Spirit Guide, so we can actually just get a Blood Moon in right now if we want to. The issue is that our opponent has this Noble Hierarch, so we still have to go for it, I think. So I am going to play the Blood Moon, hope that it turns off some of our opponent's cards. Maybe our opponent doesn't have double both green and white mana, so they can't cast a card like Voice of Resurgence, although 2 Noble Hierarchs. Okay, so that means we would really like a sweeper. We drew Cast Out, actually, so we can cycle it. We can also hold up Blessed Alliance, but I'm going to cycle the Cast Out for a fresh card here. Temple, so if we're able to get the Nahiri down next turn, that would be nice. Even though our opponent does have mana to work with, the Blood Moon probably has slowed our opponent down, like last turn, just casting a Noble Hierarch. I'm just passing here, so this could mean something like a Collected Company, which we definitely don't want to see. Here's a Chalice. So, tough spot here. We can just hold up the Blessed Alliance or go for a Chalice of the Void. I'm going to go for Chalice on 1. This will stop any future Noble Hierarchs from coming down at the very least. And we don't have 1 mana spells. Like, it stops Path to Exile, although, you know, our opponent might even use a card like Path to Exile to path their own creature in order to get a basic, so it's not the worst just having the Chalice on 1, but it looks like our opponent is playing the new company combo deck with Vizier of Remedies, Devoted Druid, and we see Dustwatch Recruiter here as well. So, tough spot. We would love a card like Anger of the Gods. That's probably our best draw to be able to sweep away all of these creatures right away. And here's the Druid, so our opponent can just combo us out next turn by getting infinite mana. We drew a Plains, so I can play Nahiri here and go ahead and minus it to exile this Vizier of Remedies. So, yep, we probably need a sweeper here. If our opponent has another Vizier, that's just game, because the Devoted Druid combo with Vizier of Remedies means our opponent can untap Devoted Druid and make infinite mana, because the -1/-1 counter that would go on the Devoted Druid does not go on it. But it looks like our opponent has found a Tidehollow Sculler. So we at least know that our opponent has black cards in their deck. So this is the Abzan build of the Collected Company deck. Gonna have to take 4 here, unfortunately. Or although, okay, so our opponent is attacking Nahiri. Okay, makes sense, makes sense. Alright, come on, Anger of the Gods. Simeon's Spirit Guide. Not what we wanted. I'm just going to pass back. This allows the recruiter to flip, but we actually don't really mind the recruiter flipping that much. And unfortunately, the Blessed Alliance isn't great against Kitchen Finks. We can use it to gain some life and draw towards our outs. Now, if we're able to get down the Elspeth next turn, that could give us a chance of just winning, depending on what our opponent has. So it looks like our opponent's just getting in for 5. So I am going to go ahead and use the Blessed Alliance with Escalate to gain life and then force our opponent to sacrifice this Kitchen Finks. So we're buying ourselves time. It looks like a Court of Calling, though. And this could just be game because our opponent can find the Vizier. Now untap this Devoted Druid. And this is going to make infinite mana. So if our opponent has something like a Walking Ballista, or even just a Court of Calling for the Ballista, then we're just dead. Because as you can see, our opponent's just able to untap, to just make a mana, untap, make a mana, untap, make a mana, untap, so on and so forth. So this could happen for a little while. That's the thing about Magic Online. I am gonna make our opponent play this out, even though it's kind of annoying because if we were playing a real game of live Magic, I would just say, okay, you have infinite mana. What can you do with it? But in this case, our opponent may need 38 mana, I guess, in order, if our opponent has a Ballista, wants to play a Ballista with 19 counters on it. You know, it takes a minute or two off the clock, so our opponent's pretty efficient here, though, and that's one of the issues with playing this type of deck online. But it's still just a great deck, and it's a new combo that a lot of players overlooked. I actually overlooked this combo myself, the Vizier of Remedies plus the Devoted Druid, but it fits into a few different decks, this being one of them. So I assume we're just dead here. And it looks like our opponent has gotten up to 38, going up to 39. So yeah, here's the Ballista. I expect it to come down, and that'll just be the game. Yep, Ballista for 20, and that's going to do it. So, looking at our sideboard, Anger of the Gods would have been the perfect draw step that game, so I am going to board another one in. Going up to 3 total copies. Wrath of God, it's a way to sweep away our opponent's creatures. I don't mind it. Chalice of the Void in this matchup is okay. I think we want to play it on 2 more than 1. Helix is a fine removal spell. Elspeth. So these are all cards we could potentially want. Rest in Peace does turn off Voice of Resurgence and things, but I don't think we want it after sideboard. So we have to think about what we can afford to cut. Blessed Alliance doesn't seem great because it's not an actual. It's not. Sometimes it's not the removal spell we want, as we saw against Kitchen Finks. Not necessarily the best in those sorts of situations. Gideon of the Trials, it's fine if we play it on turn 3, but it's not our primary game plan, so think we can shave 1 copy of Gideon of the Trials. Still have the chalices, because we're on the play. If we're able to land a Blood Moon or a chalice on the play, it's going to be great for us. Hopefully. We still want chalice on 2, I think, more than 1. But yeah, I'm going to go with this sideboard. Leyline, I guess, would have been another option against Tide Hollow Sculler and that sort of thing. Ooh, okay, interesting. So we have 2 Spirit Guides. We don't actually have... If we had like a Blood Moon, we could just have a turn 1 Blood Moon here. We don't. But we do have Anger of the Gods and Elspeth. So I'm going to try this. Journey to Nowhere is a fine removal spell in this matchup. So the plan is to get an early Elspeth. Like if we're able to just land Elspeth on turn 4 and then have Anger as backup, that seems like it could be pretty good. But yeah, sometimes there are weird draws. If we had a Chalice or a Blood Moon, we could play Chalice on 2 or play Blood Moon on turn 1, which would likely just win us the game, but we don't have those cards, so we are forced to play with what we have. And so now we drew a Nahiri, and I think we want to just run that out. So I'm going to exile the Spirit Guide, play Nahiri, tick up Nahiri. But now the question is what to discard. And the Anger could be pretty useful. So could the Journey to Nowhere. And now we're a little bit far away from casting the Elspeth, so I'm actually going to discard the Elspeth because we drew Nahiri. We can just... If we get Nahiri up to 8 loyalty, we can just go get Emrakul and win like that. So I think that's our new plan because we drew it. But our opponent may try to just attack Nahiri and keep us off that game plan. And it looks like that's what's going to happen. Devoted Druid as a follow-up, pretty solid. Well, we drew the Emrakul itself, which is not optimal. We could actually minus Nahiri to take out this Noble Hierarch if we wanted to. But we have this Anger of the Gods, so we don't mind leaving it in play that much. I think I'm just going to plus Nahiri because we really want to loot. We really want to loot pretty badly. So I'm going to discard this Emrakul away. And there's Rugged Prairie, so that's a nice pickup. So I'm going to play that. Now we can play Anger of the Gods. Could also just play Chalice on 2, which I like. I like getting the Chalice into play on 2. It would shut off the Journey to Nowhere. But the issue with playing Chalice on 2 is our opponent could still potentially Chord or Company into the Vizier. So I think we have to wait on the Chalice. And potentially just Anger this turn. Yeah, I think we just go Anger. Even though we'd like to wait for more creatures of our opponents, I think we just go for it here. It's a 2-for-1. Could have been better, but we'll take it. So hopefully our opponent isn't playing something like a Company on this particular turn. Swamp, Temple Garden, maybe... Okay, Viscera Seer, that's fine. No problem. And a Renegade Rallier, so that can get back a land. But, of course, we exiled our opponent's creatures with the Anger. So can't get back a creature. And there's a Blood Moon. Okay, so we can do some pretty cool things here if we want to. Although the Blood Moon... Well, the Blood Moon could still take our opponent off of white mana. So we can make a play like Journey to Nowhere the Rallier, play Blood Moon. That seems pretty good here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plus the Nahiri. Now I'm just going to discard this Chalice. Because I think our line this turn is to Journey the Rallier and then play Blood Moon as a follow-up. So we'll let our opponent get the Scry first, not knowing that the Blood Moon is coming down. Which it is. We do have the Blood Moon here. And while our opponent does have a couple of basics, it's still going to shut off the Temple Gardens and the Gavany Township becoming mountains is a big deal. And we've got this Nahiri sitting on 9 loyalty, threatening to just find Emrakul next turn and win us the game. And there's really not too much our opponent could do. And yep, so we're going to go to game 3 here. So that game was looking a little bit dicey until we found that Nahiri at the optimal time, and then the anger. I mean, it was a 2-for-1. It was good enough to keep our opponent's combo off the table. Now on the draw, the chalices aren't going to be quite as good. That being said, I'm not sure we have anything great we want to board in for this particular matchup. I'm going to bring in 1 Gideon, take out 1 Chalice, and this will be fine. So we're on the draw, so if we have those Gemstone Caverns on the draw instead of the play, they're going to be more effective, and we do have one. So we actually have multiple ways to play a turn 1 Chalice if we want to do that. I'm going to keep this hand. And so we're gonna put the caverns into play. And now we have to exile a card from our hand. So the question is, what do we want to exile? We could just exile the Spirit Guide. The Anger and the Wrath are pretty efficient answers to what our opponent might be doing. The Chalice, as I mentioned earlier, it's not great in the matchup, but we could potentially land it on 2 to keep some of our opponent's creatures off the board. Huh. Pretty tough decision here, actually. I mean, Wrath of God is definitely less efficient than Anger, but it's still pretty solid in this matchup. We also, if we exile the Wrath, it kind of alerts our opponent that we might have the Anger as well. So that's a little bit of a downside to that. I'm just going to exile the Chalice. Not confident about it, but we might really need the Simian Spirit Guide for mana. And Chalice on 1. Our opponent already has the Noble Hierarch down. So we'd really like a Planeswalker or a way to pressure our opponent. But we do have a decent amount of reactive stuff. So we can blow either the Wrath or the Anger depending on what creatures our opponent plays. Like if our opponent has a Kitchen Finks in play, we're probably going to want to Anger. But if our opponent has just normal threats, then we may want to go with the Wrath of God. Okay, our opponent's going to go get back that Windswept Heath, so get a little bit of card advantage going. there with the Eternal Witness. So the Simian Spirit Guide, it's a card I kept in the hand because it could be good, depending on what we draw. Now, of course, that wasn't what we wanted, another Simian Spirit Guide. Now we're looking for one of our big threats in order to make these Simian Spirit Guides useful. Something like an Elspeth Sun's Champion. If we were to draw it here, we could just play it and then be in a great spot. So if we have the Chalice, I would just play it on 2 probably this turn, but we did end up discarding it to the Caverns, not knowing we would draw basically only mana sources from here on out. So our opponent is representing Collected Company on this turn. So we have a couple of options. We could sweep the board with Wrath of God, and that would stop our opponent from companying here, essentially. Or we could let our opponent company, and then we can sweep the board next turn. So I think it's a pretty close decision, but I'm gonna go with the waiting line because I'm gonna take a scry first, but our hand isn't great. We don't have a ton of pressure. So I'm gonna let our opponent company us because if our opponent just has the combo, they have the combo. Our opponent's gonna company eventually anyway. And well, it looks like I'm wrong. Our opponent didn't have the company, so our opponent's just gonna untap here. Play a Noble Hierarch. So now we're getting more value out of any sweeper here. So we can take 4 from this Eternal Witness. Opponent still has 4 cards in hand. But there's the Elspeth Sun's Champion, so that's what we wanted. And I'm just going to go ahead and play that. Seems like a great opportunity to do so. Because if we're able to have this in play and then sweep the board, sweep away all of our opponent's creatures, we'll be in a great spot. We don't even necessarily need to worry about cards like Blood Moon and Chalice and Nahiri. We can just Elspeth our opponent. But it looks like this turn, so maybe our opponent was slow rolling the company. Now they have it. They're going to play it. And so it's going to become a question now of what is found. Hopefully we don't get, if our opponent does find the Devoted Druid and the Vizier, and then some way to take advantage of that extra mana, we may just lose the game here. So this is going to be the critical turn of the game, because if our opponent doesn't find something pretty impressive here, we can just untap with Elspeth and play and then sweep the board. So the Birds of Paradise is now going to be able to attack the Elspeth. So if our opponent has something like a Walking Ballista in addition, our opponent could say attack Elspeth with Birds and then finish it off with the Ballista. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but you know, Anafenza and Birds, it's a solid pick. They're 2 solid creatures for our opponent, but also not the end of the world from our point of view. And here's a Dustwatch Recruiter. We don't really mind that. It's just another creature that gets swept away, but maybe our opponent has something like a Chord of Calling, because lots of untapped creatures could signify that. So it looks like indeed our opponent is going after Elspeth with that Birds of Paradise. So I think I am going to go ahead and go with the Wrath of God, since our opponent doesn't have any creatures that care about the exile part of Anger. So I'm going to go ahead, Wrath the board. And then we can make 3 more soldiers and just pass the turn, being in a pretty commanding position now. And here's the kitchen thing. So we still have the anger in case we want to deal with our opponent's creatures, but to be honest, these creatures really aren't that threatening to us. We can just play towards ticking up the Elspeth Sun's Champion. And now we picked up a copy of Gideon of the Trials. So we can just go ahead and prevent the damage that the Finks would deal. Might as well start getting in with these soldiers. Okay, so Gavany Township, that's a little bit annoying. So once again, I'm just going to shut off this Kitchen Finks. Make the same attack here. Our opponent can block and eat a soldier, basically, with the Noble Hierarch by activating the Gavany Township. That's fine. Our opponent's going to take 4. Then we just drew a Blood Moon, so we can just play Blood Moon and stop this Gavany Township from future activations. I'm saving the Lightning Helix just in case something weird happens and our opponent has like a company into Vizier Devoted Druid or something like that. But that's just going to be the match.